Hello there, welcome to another lesson on C++. Today we'll be looking at classes and how they function in C++. Right, so with our usual programming style we've been doing all along, where we create variables and functions and work with them individually, that type of programming style is what we refer to as procedural. Alright, you do everything individually, and as and when you need them you can call them, put them together for whatever you need. But then today we get introduced to object oriented programming, which is basically the concept of classes. Right, so with classes we mainly want to put our variables and functions all together as one object. Alright, and then it can help us reuse our code whenever we want to reuse the code. Alright, so with the concept of classes, you come across words like attributes and object, methods, and instance. Yeah, so in this case, usually when you hear about attributes, they are basically variables. Alright, but in the case of classes, these attributes are variables inside a particular class, right? So even though they are variables, when it comes to the concept of classes or object-oriented programming, we prefer to call them attributes, right? And then we can also have functions for a class, and usually if a function is for a class or within a particular class, that function is a method of the class, so you can refer to the function as a method. Alright, so let's dive into our slides and see what we have. So classes versus objects, right? So classes are basically the blueprint that is going to give us the structure our objects are going to have, right? So depending on the class you create, that will determine the attributes or the method your objects are going to have. Alright, so we have a class that's going to be a blueprint, and classes are user defined data type that specify what attributes and behaviors an object will have. Right, so you basically put your attributes, which are going to be your variables. Behaviors could be the functions or the methods you are going to have inside your class, right? Then we can go ahead with the second point, which says a class is a code that specifies the attributes and member functions that a particular type of object may have, right? So when we move on and then start with the practicals, where we can see the structure and then how we can create our attributes and then member functions, you actually get to understand this very well. So we have objects, and objects, they are also known as instance. Alright, so an actual instance created in memory based on the class definition. So this relationship between a class and an object, you can think of it as the plan to a building, right? So you can have an architecture who is going to design the plan for a building and then later on give the plan or the design to the building. So that design here is what we term as the blueprint. All right, so that would be the class. And then you can send this plan to a constructor, and then they are going to build the building from the plan you have given them, right? So the plan itself becomes or depicts the class, and then the building, what you are actually, the constructor is actually going to build, will become an object of the plan. All right, the actual object or the building, or you can also refer to it as an instance of the class, right? So with the same plan, the constructor can build different buildings using the same blueprint or plan, right? So the plan could just be one, but then using the plan we can build a lot of buildings using just one plan. So that's the whole concept of a class or object oriented programming. All right, so let's move on. All right, so we have this diagram here depicting a class, right? So from the class, you can create an object, and usually we are going to mention something about access specifiers, right? And usually in object-oriented programming, depending on what you want to do, you want to keep your variables in a private access modifier or specifier, which actually does not allow code from the outside to have direct access to your attribute. So you usually want to have member functions that can help you get to your variables or attributes. All right, so code outside your class or object will not have direct access to your attributes or variables, but then they can get to them using your methods or your functions. All right, yeah. So this also helps improve programming in the case of encapsulation, hiding data, and the likes. Right, so let's move on. Yeah, I mentioned access modifiers or access specifiers. So basically, there are three types of them. We have the public, private, and protected. Right. So with today's lesson, we will basically be looking at the public and then the private access specifiers, and later on in the course we can include protected. Yeah. So under public, we say public members are accessible from anywhere outside the class using the dot operator. All right, so when we get into the actual program, you will see how this works. And then the private members can only be accessed or modified by member functions of the same class, right? Then we have protected, accessible within. Then we have protected, which says they are accessible within the same class and child classes, which are usually used in inheritance and the likes. Okay, so we are going to dive into our IDE and then see how the concept of classes actually work. But I think we can have the declaration before we do that. So how do you define a class? We have the class keyword. Then you continue by giving the class a name. And usually in programming, programmers prefer to give um to start a class name with a capital letter, right? So you can add that to your programming style. Yeah. So classes we prefer to give them capital letters. It all works, right? When you use a lowercase or a capital letter, it all works. But then programmers prefer a class to start with a capital letter and a function to start with a small letter, right? So you can have your class name here, and then you go ahead and you specify your access modifier. Then you can have your code, whatever code you want to implement in your program. Right, so let's get into our IDE and then create some simple classes to understand the concept of class. Yeah, so in order for us to create a class, we have to do it outside the main function, right? So let's come here. How do we create a class? We need a class keyword. So we say class, the class name. So let's say employee. Then you bring your curly braces. So my ID is giving me the semicolon at the end. So if you don't have it, you have to make sure you include a semicolon at the end, right? So let's come here and expand this. Right, so we spoke of access modifiers where we have public, private, and protected, right? So with us beginners, we want to start with the public keyword to help us understand this, and then we can build on to private and the rest. All right, so with public, we don't really have to worry because this can be accessible anywhere. So let's say we have public and then we want to give a name attribute to our class, right? So we can say a string and then a name. So these attributes are basically variables, right? And you can also say let's have a variable for age. So let's do int age. Yeah. So this is basically a simple class you can create for an employee object, right? So we have defined our class here. We don't have any functions here. This is just attributes or variables to the class. All right. So from here we can move on to how do we actually create an object or an instance for a class. So remember classes, we mentioned they are user defined data types, right? Yeah. So when creating an object for a class, you pretend, so I mentioned we prefer to use capital letters for classes, right? So let's change this to a capital E. Yeah, so in order for you to create an object, you need a data type, right? So in this case, our data type is going to be the name of our class, which is employee. Then the name of the variable. All right, so whatever you want to say, let's do emp1, and then end with this. All right, or we can simply write it in for employee one. Right, so this is going to be it. It's just like you creating a normal variable where you need the data type and then the variable name. So in the concept of classes, when you are creating an object, you need the class name which depicts the data type of our variable, right? Then the object name. All right, so let's come here and do this, the class name, and then the object name. So basically that is this, and you can assume this to be the data type, and this is the variable name, right? So again, let me say data type here and variable name. And variable name. So how do we actually get access to these things? We have created a class. How can we assign values to the name and then the integer? So remember back in our slides with the public access modifier, we had this here where we say the public members are accessible from anywhere outside the class using the dot operator, right? So let's say we want to assign a value to our employee. We want to put his name there and we also want to put his age there. All you simply have to do is to call the variable name. So employee one dot. So you realize that as soon as I click the dot, we are having the attributes inside the class appearing for us. So let's do the name. We want to put a name here. And we can do equal to the name of the employee. So this is going to be the name of the employee. And we can also have employee dot the age, right? And we can put a number here. So this is basically how you assign values to your attributes. Very simple, right? So the name of the object dot the attributes. Then you can assign the respective values you want to assign. So now let's simply do some output and say hello to the name, right? So the same way you are going to do employee one dot the name, and this is going to give us the name of the employee or the value that has been assigned to the employee name, right? Then let's come down here and do the same thing for the age. So let's say you are, how do we get age? Employee one dot age. You are the age years old, right? So very simple. You can run this and see how the concept of classes is being implemented here. All right, so we have hello. The name we assigned was John Doe. You are 45 years old. Right, so we can end this and build on this. So this was something very basic to help us understand the concept of classes, right? So now we can build on this and actually get to see how all these things come together and work for an object or for a class. Right, so I'm going to take these things away from here. And I'm going to take this away. So I'm going to create a class for a bank account, right? A bank account, and this is going to have some sort of balance for our objects or our users. And this balance, we just want it to be accessible to the particular user, right? You don't want anyone accessing anyone's account balance or something, right? So this example is going to introduce us to the private access specifier, right? So let's do private. Then you close the private with a colon. Then let's have double here, double. Then the variable name. What can we do? We can do balance, right? Yeah. Then we can come down here and do public, right? So let's say public. We want to have some functions, right? That will help us deposit some amount of money into our balance, and another function that will help us withdraw money if we want to take something off our balance. And then we can have another function to display the balance we are having inside our account, right? So let's go ahead and create something to help us deposit. All right, so we are going to create a function, and usually if you want to have a function that is going to put something inside your attributes, which are usually going to be under private, we refer to those functions as setters, right? So these setters will set or will have permission to modify our private attributes or variables, and then we can get this as functions that are going to just help us display the values we have in our attribute, right? So let's go ahead and have some setters here. Setter function. So we are going to have a deposit function, and this function is just going to, so let's say data type is going to be void and deposit, and we are going to have a let's do amount, right? Or just a. Yeah, so this function will require the user to pass a certain amount of money that they want to deposit, right? So void deposits, and we can have our balance, plus equals to the value they are going to specify. Right, so we can actually complete this to be amount, right? So this is just going to modify the value we have in our balance. It's going to add whatever amount the user is going to set whenever they call our deposit function, right? Then we can also have another, let's end this with a semicolon. Then we can also have another setter function that is going to help us withdraw some amount of money from our balance, right? So let's go ahead and do, this is also going to be void because we are not going to return anything. And so this time around we want to withdraw, so we can actually do set withdraw. Yeah, set withdraw, the set just to indicate that this is a setter function, right? So we can also do double here and amount. We can do the same thing here. So let's say set deposit. Yeah, it works. And we can have this here. So this is going to take some amount of money from our balance, right? So we can do the balance minus equals the amount the user is going to pass, right? Then we can have one last function. Let's call that a getter function, and this is going to display the balance we have inside our attribute, which is a private attribute, right? So this is going to return a value. So let's do double and get balance, right? So we are not going to pass anything. We just call this function to get the amount we have in our balance. So we are going to return balance, as simple as that. Right, so what have we done? We've created a balance attribute, and this balance attribute, we have a function that helps us deposit amount, some sort of money into the balance, and we also have a function that will help us withdraw some sort of money or amount of money from our balance, and we also have a function that will help us get our balance displayed, right? Yeah, so let's go ahead, and so back inside our main function we are going to create an object, right? So whatever we have here is just the blueprint for our class, right? A plan to a building, right? So let's go ahead and actually create an object. So what is the name for our class? Bank account. So we can have a data type of bank account, and then we can have account one as our first user, then in this, right? So the same concept, assume this to be the data type of your variable, right? And this is going to be your variable name. So let's go ahead and put some values into some amount of money into our balance. So we can do account dot, we want to deposit something. So let's do set deposit. We have to pass a value, right? So we can do 200, and this is going to pass 200 into our balance, right? Our set deposit function, which is basically adding this amount to our balance. All right, so let's go ahead and try to get our balance right now. So we can do that by saying cout a current balance. is. So how are we going to get that? We call our getter function. So we can do account one dot get balance, right? All right. So this is basically depositing a certain amount of money into our balance attributes, right? So let's run this and we expect to see our balance being right. Okay, so this is actually a function. Let's do this and run this again. All right, so we have this here. The current balance is 200, right? So we have deposited 200 into our account, right? So let's go ahead and withdraw something. And how do we withdraw something? We just call our withdraw function, right? So you can pause the video and try your hands on withdrawing some amount of money from your balance and then displaying it to the screen. When you are done, you can come back and follow the video, right? So let's do this. We can do account dot we want to withdraw, so set withdraw. Then let's take away, let's say 50 and end this. And now we want to check the balance again. So you can do that by saying the current balance is. Right, so after making a withdrawal, the current balance after withdrawal, the current balance after the withdrawal is, then we can also get this. So with our 200 deposit and 50 withdrawal, we expect to have the current balance after the withdrawal to be 150, right? So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we have the current balance is 200 after the deposits, right? And then we have the current balance after the withdrawal is 150. Yeah. So this is a very basic concept to help you understand the concept of classes. And we can build on this to improve our coding skills, right? So there is a way you can actually have your functions outside the class, right? You see, in the concept of functions in our function class, we realize that you can actually have a function prototype at the top of the main function and do the function definition below your main function, right? So we can have the same concepts in classes. So instead of having these things here, defining your functions inside your actual class, you can just put your prototypes here and then do the function definitions for your methods or your function outside the class. All right, so using this example, how can we do that? I'm going to modify this a bit. Yeah, and let me also mention, usually with get balance or with get methods or functions, you usually want to make these things a constant, right? So with that you are telling the compiler that this function is basically to get something. All right, so you don't give them access to modify your data from your class, right? Or any data of the object. They just have to get the data without any modification, right? So usually you can have this in a lot of programs. Don't be confused when you see them. All right, so let's build on this. We are going to take these things away. Let me copy this and I'm going to delete this right here. All right, so let's assume these are our function declarations, right? So how do we get our full function? Let's come down here and then define the full functions. All right. So I think we have notes on that. Let's go back to our notes and see how those things come about. Yeah, so defining member functions, you need the data type of the function. It's just like you creating a function, right? So how do you create a function? When creating a function, you need the return type of the function, right? The function name, and then if you have any parameters, of course the braces are important, right? But then the new thing here is the class name, and then these two columns, which is a scope resolution operator. All right, so this new thing here, the class name and then the scope resolution operator, is telling the compiler that this function is a method or a member function of this particular class, right? It's not just any global function or anything. It belongs to this particular class with a class name you specify, right? So we have an example here, double rectangle. So rectangle is going to be the name of the class. Then getWidth is going to be the function name. You have your parameter, and then whatever code you want is going to come inside here. So let's go back to the compiler. All right. So let's come here. What do we need? We need a return type. What is the return type? We are doing it for the setDeposit, setWithdraw, and getBalance. All right, so what is the data type of setDeposit? Void. So we can do void. The class name, what is the class name? Bank account, right? Then the scope resolution operator 2 of this. Then you can get your function. So we are doing it for setDeposit, right? So you do this and make sure the function header is just the same as what you have in the prototype, right? So amount, sometimes you can choose to ignore the variable, right, as we learned in our function class. So this also works, and you can have your function definition right inside here. Okay, so how to take away this and that. Yeah, so basically that is it. So if we are to take this away, we are going to have void keyword, the function name, the parameter, and the program or code for the function, right? But then this right here, the class name and then the scope resolution operator is telling us this function is a method or a member function for this particular class, right? Yeah, so you can go ahead and do that for these two, setWithdraw and then getBalance. All right, so I have to mention with the getBalance, same concept. The headers of your prototype, they have to be the same of your definition, right? So when you create the function for the getBalance, you have to add your const keyword to it, right? So you can pause the video and try your hands on it, and after come back and continue with the video. All right, so I'm going to do it here. I have void the class name, bank account, scope resolution operator, set withdrawal. Then we have double amount. You can have your definition here, balance minus equals to amount, right? So that will be it. And then we have the getter function where we are going to do double bank account scope resolution operator, the function name getBalance. Then this time around, this doesn't require any parameter, so let's just add the const keyword and the braces for our function. So return the balance, right? Yeah, So this is creating the methods or the member functions for the class outside the class, right? So you come here and all what you see for the class is this, right? But then these prototypes are telling you that we have the code outside the class, right? So it's just like normal functions where you have your function prototypes at the top of the main function and then the function definition below the main function. That's the same concept here. All right. So if we should run this, we are supposed to get the same results. Yeah, no changes, the same results. We can actually change the values and say, so let's do 1000 here and let's take away 300. And we are having the current balance is 1000, the current balance after the withdrawal is 700. Exactly, nothing changed. We just improved the structure of our code, right? There is something I wanted to mention, right? So this case we are having just the double balance here, right? And we having the private access specifier at the top and the public below it. It doesn't really, it's not really necessary, right? You are not obligated to always put this at the top. You can bring this below the public. After doing your public, you can have your private here, right? So there can be a case where we have balance and you also have something different, right? Let's say name as part of your private attributes, right? So instead of doing this, sometimes you can choose not to do it this way, but then come down same way, have your private here and with a colon, and then introduce your new attribute here. This also works, right? If you want to have, if you want to set something to it, you can do account. This is actually under private, right? So you can't just access account dot name. Account dot name is equal to let's say Gabi. You can't just have as direct access to this because this is a private specifier, right? So let's actually run this and see the error we get. So it is telling us that string bank account, the name is a private within. So in order for us to access this, you can actually create a member function that will help you get to this. So let's do void set name, and we are going to pass a name to it and um underscore here, so it works. So let's do the name is going to be equal to whatever the user is going to pass, right? So this is a setter. You can have a getter, right? I can simply do a void get name, and we are not passing anything. We can just do cout name. All right, and line. So let's come here to our main function. So the name, instead of doing this, you can do set name and put that there, and down here you can say get name account one dot get name. All right, and this should basically give us the name of, this is a function. Remember to bring the parentheses. So let's run this again. Set name. All right. So we have to pass this as a parameter. So like so, and let's run this again. So we have the current balance to be 1,000, withdrawal, after the withdrawal of 300 we have 700, then we have the name to be Gabby, right? So this is basically helping us understand this more. So we have this right here, we could have just had it here. All right, so it all works. You can explore around this, and yeah, that will be it for this lesson. And I hope you understood the concept of classes. This is very basic, and with this lesson you can explore and have a beautiful understanding on classes. So on our next lesson we would actually try creating something similar to this, just to help us understand the basic concept of classes, right? So this is going to be the end of this tutorial. Make sure you like the video, subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to put it down in the comment section, and most importantly, do all to share the video with your friends.